Namaste, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Filter Coffee with author and researcher Mitra Desai. Welcome you, ma'am. On behalf of the Verandah Club, it's a great honor to have you and welcome you. Mitra Desai is an author, researcher, and speaker who has published 2 books with Subbu Publications, a leading Indic publication house. The first book being Shitala, How India Enabled Vaccination. That is the book under discussion today. It's a fantastic book, ma'am. Congratulations and thank you for bringing out this wonderful work to all of us. And the second book, which hopefully we'll be doing in the near future, is The Flag of Ananta in Sugriva's Steps. Author Mitra Desai's strength is bringing out the forgotten narratives, and she does it so well and with so much of research and in-depth research and a lot of understanding of the Indian knowledge systems. She's an Indic researcher and speaker who works to and unveils the unacknowledged contributions of ancient India across diverse fields like medicine, science, philosophy, and culture. Mitraji breathes life into the lost voices and erased legacies that have shaped our world. Like the first page, there's a quote which the author has taken, and it's so relevant and nice, by George Orwell. The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. It is so true, and it is so synonymous to the African proverb, until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. Welcome you, ma'am. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book, and I finished it in one sitting. And the way you have shaped the protagonist, Tara, and her conversation during the COVID pandemic with her grandfather, and how she discovers and unmasks the dominant narrative, and how you have brought out the facts, is really an eye opener for all of us. And it's a must read. Shitala is a must read. Shitala is, by the way, the goddess of smallpox and other infectious diseases. And India has been a pioneer, and you have brought out the untold stories to all of us. Welcome you, ma'am, once again.
Dhanyawad Jaganathan ji, and thank you so very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you and the members and viewers of Verandah Club. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, may I ask you what inspired you to write this book, ma'am?
Sure. Now, before we start, can I do something that is quintessentially Australian, which is called the acknowledgement of country? And I'll tie that into what the inspiration was. So I'm speaking to you today from the land of the Gubbi Gubbi people, and they have looked after this part of Australia for nearly 18,000 years. So I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Now, in many ways, the inspiration to write is coming from my understanding of our shared history with India and Australia. So when the British came here, they had 250 languages and 800 dialects. As I speak to you today, there's hardly a few languages left that are marked as nearing extinction, with 1 to 10 elders left. So as the language got erased, what was lost with it was the indigenous knowledge of songlines. How do you cross from one territory to another? Or things like when the trees have the bloom of a red colored bottle brush flower, you don't hunt the crabs, you hunt them when the flowers are yellow, because that's when the crabs have laid their eggs and gone back. Or there's a mention of a monster that was there for 45,000 years ago, which they've only just discovered. But indigenous people here have preserved that through the living memory and through their dreamtime stories. And their stories and their history is all but erased within the context that we are now. And so I suppose my desire to write, it comes from that place where ideally I don't want to be lost to the sands of time. And when I say I mean the rich Bharatiya heritage that we are the recipients of. It's just my way of trying to preserve that one in one way, shape, or form.
Amazing, ma'am. Amazing. The way you acknowledge the local history, the local people, and the local culture is something that we all need to follow. What is the importance of telling your own stories or building the importance of narratives, the right narratives?
Narratives, yep. And we are in a war of narratives, essentially, isn't it? All the time, it is about the dominant narrative. So I think a little bit of context here for why I think we need to tell our own stories. And it's very right. Like you said before, the African proverb, until the lion roars, the hunters will tell the story. So let me take you back to the Macaulay Minute of 1835. In that minute, it's quite popular and everyone knows about it. But realistically, there's a statement in there where he says all the historical information which has been collected from all the books in the Sanskrit language are less valuable than what may be found in the paltry abridgment of the preparatory school in England. So effectively, without knowing Sanskrit or Arabic, he had said that that's how little value there was to the Sanskrit or the Indic literature. Now, it is this deeply entrenched view of the colonizers that informed how they wrote about us or how they viewed us. And I think so far this has been a one-way street. But it's really important for us to now step into that conversation and turn it from a monologue into a dialogue. Because otherwise, they have told the story so far. And not only have they just told the story on our behalf, they have actually benefited that in more ways than one. All the colonies, all the places that were colonized, you can clearly see that they've taken resources and people from there. In India, there was that additional thing of the knowledge systems also being taken. Incredible levels of information was taken out of India. And while they were denigrating the people who've created that knowledge, we can see that the colonizers have continuously benefited and they've diligently researched that knowledge. But so far, in the annals of history, we'll see we don't get any mention. I mean, when you talk about civilizations, you can see people effortlessly talking about the Greek civilization, the Roman civilization, there's Hittite, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and then there's a passing mention to the Indus Valley civilization, simply because now there's evidence which is irrefutable. You have to mention it. So they'll briefly talk about it like, oh, yes, that's tokenism. But realistically, the amount of knowledge that went out of here and that benefited the systems worldwide is incredible. That's researching that for ourselves first and then sharing our stories.
Absolutely, ma'am. I think we are the last living civilization.
We have our narrative.
And a thriving civilization with great Indian knowledge systems, which we are reviving in the last few years. Am I audible, ma'am?
Sorry, you're breaking up.
Yeah, I think we are the last living civilization with great Indian knowledge systems. And in the last few years, a lot of efforts are being taken by the government to revive the Indian knowledge systems. And what do you think has been the impact of Indian knowledge systems in the development of vaccination as we know it today, ma'am?
Okay, all right. So I have to say the IKS initiatives that are currently underway, there's a lot of work being done. So that's a fantastic start. So now for us to understand the impact of vaccination, maybe let me do a little bit of a scene setting of what it was like before we even come to this point. So the main story that is available to us on the internet today is that Jenner is the father of vaccination, and he developed that in response to smallpox. So for us to understand what his contribution was, a little flashback is that smallpox has been eradicated for nearly 40 years now. So we don't really talk about it. But the fact of the matter is, it was prevalent for nearly 2,500 years before Jenner discovered the cure. And it's a disease that has traveled the entire length and breadth of this planet. It was all pervading. And there's one estimate by, I think it's Donald Henderson, he talks about, and he estimates that there's nearly 5 million deaths on an average annually, for long as it has been with us. So on that background, then suddenly Jenner comes along and he uses what is already known to people, that if someone suffered from cowpox, then you don't suffer from smallpox.
Smallpox.
That apparently everyone tells us is common knowledge. Europe mein to sabko pata tha, so that's common knowledge. And so suddenly he then found a way to prove that to be true, and that ended up becoming the foundation of vaccine as we know it today. And obviously, as with all technologies, there has to be innovation. There should be innovation, otherwise we'd become stagnant. So it progressed to our understanding today. Now, when you look at Jenner's story, it is so fascinating. You'll get even minute details about his story, that he wanted to experiment. So he took the cowpox infection from his dairy maiden. Even her name is available to us. Sarah Nelms was her name. And then he infects his gardener's son. So his name is John Pip. And he infects that little boy, 8-year-old, with this cowpox. Obviously, then he becomes infected with that. And then he tries the smallpox vaccination on that boy. So now when you look at this story, there's so much detail available to us, yet we do not know that Banaras Brahmins went from town to town in India treating this disease. And it is with an exceptional level of accuracy. So I think for us to understand where we've come today, we need to ask some questions. There's gaps in the narrative that is being told to us, and we need to be asking some of those questions. Like, you have a disease that's prevalent for 2,000 plus years, suddenly someone discovers the cure. What happened? And he discovered the cure in less than 12 months. So when we start investigating that, we realize that there's numerous accounts. We just have to, you know how we do the Rangoli or the Kovalam? We have to connect the dots.
Connecting the dots.
The picture that emerges is just fascinating. You have accounts. So there's Dr. John Howell, who actually administers a lecture to the College of Physicians. And he then prints that as a 40-page pamphlet, and that's obviously a book that's still available for us to refer to. But only after Dr. Howell makes that information public, then 23 years later, you have Jenner making this discovery. And so the information that goes from India fulfills a very important gap. And that gap is, until that point, the fact that infection can be introduced into a healthy person, that was not known. So the adaptive immunity, that's the function. Yeah. So they understood that concept from us, and then they said, all right, we already know cowpox doesn't suffer from smallpox. All right, let's try this. And there you have the emergence of vaccination. But that missing link was several documentations coming out of India saying that the Banaras Brahmins are treating that to an accuracy of 1 in a million error. That's what he observes.
Amazing.
So it's fascinating stuff that here you have the mention of Sarah Nelms and John Pip, people who've been there just for the experiment. They've now been immortalized in our history, and yet such phenomenal contributions that we've made, no one even talks about, no one even knows. And in fact, there's, I don't remember the name now, but he has actually said this is just a Hindu mischief. Claiming this is actually a Hindu mischief, is how he calls it. So that's why we need to, yes, but we've made a big impact on the foundation for us to get where we are.
Absolutely. So narratives are very, very important. And what is the significance of Shitala, ma'am?
Okay, so with that, she's the goddess of all eruptions and diseases. We know that, but the significance of that is easily to explain that simply is, for example, here when I'm speaking to someone, if I tell them Santa Claus, everyone associates that with Christmas, with festivities, with the birth of Christ and all of that. So that simple image of the Santa Claus captures the entire concept for them. Same is the case with Shitala, or as she's known in Bengal, Guttiki Thakurain, or down south she's known as Mariamman.
Mariamman.
The iconography, yeah. I actually mapped all of the temples that are still there, and I found nearly 600 temples that are still existing. So probably many are lost
In
in time.
fact, in Coimbatore, there is a temple called Plague Mariamman. So when plague was erupting, there is a
Yeah.
deity people used to worship specifically for plague.
Yes, yeah. And I think around her are also smaller deities. There's one for fever. There's Debughanta. There's a few other smaller deities who sit in that pantheon. But the way, when you look at her iconography, sometimes she's shown as plainly dressed, or sometimes just with a red sari and just very minimally dressed than what the other deities are, which are all of our other deities are, but royally dressed. But this one is simply dressed, and she has a winnowing fan. So when I say winnowing fan, in Marathi we call it soup. It's like the elephant ears soup or supli, something like that. So that's there. Then there's a broom. Now all of this, when you look at all of that cohesive picture, it tells us a variety of things. Now, one would be when the patient is burning with fever from smallpox, the winnowing fan could be the fan to make sure the temperature comes down. The way that she's dressed could indicate to be very lightly dressed during that time. The broom could be to make sure that you maintain cleanliness around that time. Yes. Another interpretation of the broom also is that it's the prickly pointed instrument, which could have been used to transfer the pus as well, because in some iconography she is carrying a pot. So the pot could be of water or also of the variolous material to transfer the infection. So that's one interpretation as well. But by and large, we see that Shitala is enshrined in our day-to-day lives. We have Shitala Ashtami as well. Shitala Ashtami, or in some places it's called Basoda as well. So that's actually a festival. And that festival, I think in North India, the ritual is that that's the last day that you will eat stale food. And after that, you'll not consume stale food.
Okay.
And that was also similar to, how we do the deep clean for Diwali, before Diwali, or any big festival. All of the Indian households will do a deep clean. That was also a time to do a deep clean. And so instead of asking us to go out of the way, our ancestors had just integrated that beautifully into part of our life. That these are the things, if you get in trouble, Mariamman is the goddess to go to, and these are all the things that you need to do. So I think they were master storytellers and made it easy for us, really.
Absolutely. I think the whole cultural aspects of Sanatana Dharma is so ingrained and intertwined that every aspect it's a way of part and parcel of our daily life, like you said. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Ma'am, we have known temples to be economic centers, or the cities were centered around a temple. That's how the Indian Hindu way of life functioned. What is the significance of temples in the vaccination process? Beyond economic activity, what is the role? Those days, how it was?
So for now, I think there's anecdotal information, and as more and more research, more people are now starting to talk about temples being the economic centers of activity, temples being banks. So we're starting to understand that it has been a huge ecosystem in itself, which has suffered a lot of, what shall I say? Well, we're glad we still have the temples after all the destructions.
Yes.
But some of the references that we see are the garland makers outside the temples, and we still have them in all the temples. So some of the garland makers would actually be inoculators. And we have mentions as late as nearly 1800s So we have mentioned from someone named Risley, Officer Risley. They said inoculation was the occupation of garland makers and barbers who possess a book called the Basantatika.
Amazing
And
social integration.
exactly. I mean, think about it. Here, if you have to get a vaccination, you have to get an appointment, go get the GP to confirm that that's the right diagnosis, and then you go. The nurse will do that vaccination for you. There's a lot of gatekeeping, but there, you actually have people on the ground who are quickly able to confirm, yep, this is it. And then and there, they're able to actually do the tikakaran. So temples may have played a large role in terms of providing the ecosystem that made it possible for us to deal with this more effectively than other civilizations have. But we'll need to find out a bit more about that for sure.
Faith and science intertwined and amazing, truly amazing. I thoroughly enjoyed the book, ma'am, and like I said, and I recommend everyone to read this book irrespective of the age. It is a must read. It is a discovery of the protagonist Tara when she has a conversation with her grandfather during the COVID pandemic and how she unravels the story. And truly, in those 1 or 2 years, India brought out the Covaxin, developed the Covaxin, the vaccine story we all know. It is an amazing
Yeah.
development, and it is a moment of truth for an entire civilization where we have probably stumbled upon what we were really good at during the COVID pandemic. So, I once
Thank you
again,
so much, Jagannathji. That the feedback for me is very useful to know that you were able to actually complete the book as well in one sitting, and the fact that you liked it, that's good feedback for me. So far, I've
yes,
had my youngest reader was an 8-year-old boy, and
amazing.
the oldest. I didn't even expect that until I got a handwritten, "Dear Mitra Auntie, I enjoyed the book," and then he made a few comments. And my senior most reader has been an 88-year-old Canadian professor.
Wow.
Um, so I had no idea when I wrote this that it would become readable by such a large bracket of readers.
Ma'am, both your
So
books are doing quite well in the US also. I think they've been selected for
yes,
the reading challenge and things like that.
yes,
Can you tell
yes,
about
they
that?
are. So Tejas is it's like the Battle of the Books.
Hmm.
And that's being conducted by Dharma Civilization Foundation. So
Hmm.
they had selected a few books, I think some 10 or 14 books across various age groups were selected for a reading competition. And the contestants had to go through and create variety of informative products speaking about the books that they had chosen. So that's currently underway. I think it's culminating into a final contest in a month's time, sometime in June. So I'm very much looking forward to interacting the set of contestants there as well. It's always good to speak to a young audience, catch them young, like they say.
Yes.
And then that's a good way to have a conversation because they ask so many curious questions that and that's how my journey into this whole Indic journey began, really, because my son asked me hard questions and I had to go and find answers. And then one
Hmm.
thing led to another until eventually I started doing more in-depth research and turning them into books. So yes, kids are hard taskmasters, hard questions, but they make us think. So
Congratulations on the Tejas, your books
thank
being
you.
selected at the Tejas contest, ma'am. And
Thank
any
you.
new books coming up, ma'am, after Flag of Ananta, you're writing anything new that we can look forward to?
I'm I'm researching, I'm toying with a few different ideas. There's so many topics that I'm interested in, and there's so much to currently explore. So there's a few fascinating things that I'm currently looking at. But one of them that keeps coming up is the narrative around shipbuilding and
Hmm. Hmm.
how India was never a
Excellent.
shipfaring country. And I think Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal is
Hmm.
writing
Hmm. Hmm.
he's
Land
talking
of
more about that because he's
Ocean's
working on a
Churn.
stitched ship. Yes, but he's currently working on reviving an ancient technique of stitching the ship together without any nails. And so as I'm looking at that particular topic, in my own research, I'm finding some fascinating information. So for example, there was a Portuguese galleon, which was the largest ship of its time. And on its way back from India, it was looted by the pirates. And there was incredible stuff that was looted that funded England's wars against Spain, and it was larger than Spain's economy at the time.
My God. It will be a
And that
very
was just one
interesting.
ship that left Indian shores. So there's anything that you read about India with a critical view and go past the initial gatekeeping, you find so much fascinating information. That it's like, ye dekho ya wo dekho. So there's a few topics I'm
Absolutely.
thinking
We look
about right now.
forward, ma'am. We are looking forward. And in the near
Thank
future,
you.
I shall be reading up Flag of Ananta in Sugriva's footsteps.
Please
And
do.
I hope to do a program with you in the near future, ma'am.
Sounds good. Happy to reconnect you at that time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking out time and enriching our audience, members at the Verandah Club on Shitala. Thank you so much, ma'am. Namaste. Jai
Thank you
Hind.
for giving me the time and the opportunity. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.